Okay, great. So we'll get started here. Okay. Welcome everyone that's joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We'll give everyone time to come on in. Yeah. Okay, great. Just gonna wait one more moment and then we'll get started. Thank you everyone for coming. And it wants me to say yes. Okay, great. Now it'll let me show my slides here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so one more minute here. Well, let's get started. So welcome everybody to the Fox Cities Book Festival. We are so happy we could join together for a virtual festival. And we're excited that everything's working out and we've got a great set of events planned for the week. So today, look up here. So as you know, the book festival is really a collaborative event between so many public libraries, school districts, organizations, communities, community members. So it's something that we really couldn't do without the support of all of the people in the community that support it and continue to help with it and volunteer their time. So we're really thankful for all the support. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. This the other screen here. Okay. And also to just a couple more donors too. Just wanted to bring that up and show them there. If you're interested in supporting the festival, you certainly can do so. You can always donate online or by check. You can also support us by telling other people about us, sharing us on social media, or just interacting and just by coming to events. So we appreciate any type of support. It allows us to help keep the festival free. All events are free. So as we all have been doing a lot of virtual events, this is probably something that we just want everyone to be aware of. Understand that any sort of harassment or unkind behavior will not be tolerated and you would be asked to leave the virtual event. So just a reminder for everybody to remain kind. All right, so now the moment here we've got, I'm just going to click my other screen here. So we're so excited today. We have a great program. So we have a wonderful collaboration today too for our program. We have Carrie Esselman, who is, we have this here, the Dementia Care Specialist with the Aging and Disability Resource Center of Outagamie and Wapaka County. And she's going to be here in conversation with Susan McFadden. And Susan is our author. She wrote Creating a Dementia-Friendly Communities and why we need them and how we can create them. And Susan is a nationally known leader in the dementia-friendly community environment. I'm really lucky to have her here in the Fox Cities. The Fox Valley Memory Project, the nonprofit she co-founded, is a well-known model for organizations seeking to overcome the stigma and resulting social isolation often associated with dementia. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce them, welcome them, and to get started. So let me stop sharing this and we will move the floor over to Carrie. Let me drop this. All right. So you
All right.
should be able to speak now.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
It's so good to be here. And as Megan said, I'm the Dementia Care Specialist for the Aging and Disability Resource Center of Outagamie, Waupaca, and Calumet counties. And I am very honored to be here to discuss this wonderful book written by Susan McFadden. So welcome, Susan, and it's very good to have you here to have such a fluid conversation regarding this topic and some of these great points that you've made in this book.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Good, good. So you have written a book in 2011 of Aging Together, and now the Dementia-Friendly Communities, Why We Need Them and How We Can Create Them. What was your transition from Aging Together into why you felt you needed to write this next book?
Aging Together was the book that my husband John and I wrote. We collaborated on that. And that was a book that was kind of laying the groundwork theoretically, you might say academically. He brought in his perspective as a pastor and theologian. So we were dealing with ideas in that book. And for this one, I wanted to get practical, and I wanted to talk about what people are doing around the world to create dementia-friendly communities, and also to have us think about, well, how could we do this if we don't have any of these programs and services in place? So I wanted to move more towards the practical.
Good. And speaking of that practical, I know we talked before, but your endnotes or keynotes at the end of each chapter was very informative and felt like it was just listening to you talk by summing up that chapter. So I just have to reiterate that is a very nice addition to this book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you read them.
Yeah.
Because my whole scholarly life, I was never able to do that because the papers and book chapters I wrote were very strictly regulated in terms of style. And so you couldn't use footnotes or endnotes to kind of elaborate personally on some ideas. So with this book, I decided I'd go for it. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, and that really stood out to me as I was, and just to refer to certain points or certain other books or articles as well too. So it was just a whole nother part of the book that was very informative. So I really liked that piece. Now, in the beginning of the book, I highlighted your description and points on disruption and personal disruption and how it can be cushioned and how it can be talked about in prevalence of social attitudes and dementia. Can you kind of go into a little bit about how you came about?
Sure. That term disruption has been used for a while, and it was used in the business community, say when technology companies came in and brought brand new ways of doing things, and we can all think of examples of that. So the term disruption was out there in College of Business writings and things like that. And then you used to hear a few years ago about people who were disrupting in a good way, not a bad way. But of course, we can think of bad disruptions too. And so when I wrote this book, I was thinking that the typical way that dementia is viewed needs to be disrupted, that we need to really forcefully state that the stigma must be addressed and eliminated, and that assumptions that we've made about people who are experiencing the various types of dementia really need to be critically examined and changed if necessary. Well, I handed the book manuscript in on Halloween of 2019, never in the wildest dreams expecting that all of our lives would be disrupted by a pandemic. And so that term disruption is now being used for what we've all been through for
Mhm.
almost 2 years, 18 months. And so, we can think of it in a good way and also in a bad way. I was trying to think of it as a way forward to get away from the stigma that is attached to these various types of dementia.
Right. And one of your quotes in the book says, personal disruption can be cushioned when family members, friends, and people in their communities embrace the news story and disrupt prevalent social attitudes about dementia.
Right. And I was really working with that metaphor of a story, because we do have stories that we tell. And these can become really embedded in our ways of thinking about things. So a few years ago, I remember my students and I did some research in the Fox Valley where we distributed questionnaires asking people about their attitudes about dementia. And in addition to these surveys that we distributed, we also did a lot of interviews. And I was quite amazed to hear a number of people state, as if fact, that when people get Alzheimer's disease, they get mean. Have you ever heard that, Carrie?
Absolutely.
I mean, but personally, I was just really surprised to see so many people were telling that story, that when you begin to, show signs of Alzheimer's disease, you get mean. It's not true. I mean, some people might because they're frustrated and, they're having trouble communicating, etc. But to tell that as the story about dementia, no. So we need to change the story that we tell. The old one is one of darkness and doom and gloom and your life is over and all that. And that's not true.
Correct. Yeah, I've worked with individuals to say, we got the diagnosis, but he's not mean. And it's like, well, no.
Where does that come from? I don't know. Yeah.
In the terms I've used in the past of being senile and,
Right.
and, just how we kind of looked at all of that in the past. You go into some parts about the Eden alternative and loneliness, helplessness, and boredom.
Yes.
And can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I find that that's a very powerful research finding. So it's been something that researchers have noted repeatedly, that the three biggest problems of older adults, and this is just older adults in general, are loneliness, helplessness, and boredom. And it's especially true for people who have some type of dementia. Now, if you think about that, I wish we don't have a slide that says loneliness, helplessness, and boredom, but imagine that we did. And think about how people think we ought to address the different types of dementia. Like take, for example, what is commonly called Alzheimer's disease, right? And there are a lot of people who are looking for the cure, the magic pill that we can take that's going to eliminate all the problems in the brain and then grandma will be herself again. But is that pill, which I don't think is really ever going to be developed like people think it is that going to address the loneliness, helplessness, and boredom? It's not. Right? It's the social programs that we embed in our communities. It's the way we address the attitudes and change the attitudes in our communities. That's what's going to really focus on remediating people's loneliness and their feelings of helplessness. The feelings of helplessness are, well, I'm not working anymore, and there's not, maybe I'm, physically, I can't do as much as I used to do. And so what good am I, right? And that feeling of helplessness is powerful and very distressing. And then the boredom, a lot of people deal with their boredom, and you've probably seen this too, by turning on the television and leaving it on all day long and just kind of spacing out to the what I would consider the general mindlessness of a lot of television, right? And so they're doing that to kind of self-medicate. And we need to address that. And we can't do that with a magic pill.
Right, right. And that kind of goes into my next conversation about like human rights and dementia, and what's been, around the world that's been done. And specifically, you mentioned in Scotland with the panel concept, the participation in decisions. So care partners, they're partners, and how that term is changing. Caregivers is changing into that care partners concept, that including that individual that is has the diagnosis in their plan, in the decisions that are needed to be made at every level. And then accountability by health and social care professionals is a big one too. And to know that another country is labeled this and working towards that, the participation in decisions, accountability by health and social care professionals, empowerment to know their rights, and then legality of all decisions. Brings the human rights and the dignity that these are grown adults that just are with a diagnosis but still need to have that right.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that is being discussed more, as you say, around the world. And certainly people in England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland too have provided tremendous leadership on this. I mean, that's where John and I first experienced memory cafes, was going to England and driving around, visiting church basements and memory cafes. And so one of the things that they did was to interview people about what they wanted in their communities. So these are people who have some type of dementia. What do you want? And they want to be treated with dignity. They do not want to be treated like children. They don't want people to talk down to them or to not talk to them. One of the things that we hear all the time, and I'm sure you have too, is a couple goes to a restaurant, care partner and the person who has some type of dementia. And the server at the restaurant says to the spouse without the dementia, what does he want? Or what does she want? And that then eliminates that person. It makes them invisible almost. And it removes their sense of human dignity. So it starts on that very personal level of, how are you treated in shops and restaurants, et cetera. But then it also extends on up to various types of programs within states, laws even, that would address the dignity of these individuals, and the way that our policies and our practices right now may not be supporting that dignity. This is a pretty new idea. I've seen it just emerging in the last decade, I'd say.
And as you say, emerging within the last decade and timeline and whatnot, how do you feel since writing the Aging Together book from 2011 till now? How have you felt writing your current book, how you would have, or how things have changed since then with the Aging Together?
Well, in that book was called Aging Together, : see, academics always need a colon. Dementia, friendship, and flourishing communities. So we were trying to talk about, yes, dementia, but we wanted to bring in friendship, because back then, most of the research that was looking at social relationships of persons living with a type of dementia was focused on family. And so it was the assumption of researchers as well as practitioners like you that the main social engagement was going to come from family. And that is far too limiting. I mean, if you look at the way families have changed, right, and the way they are changing, if you think about this aging baby boomer generation, we have on average fewer children. And the generations following us do too. And so we're going to need to broaden our concepts here, and we need to include friends. And then Aging Together also was talking about flourishing communities. And one of the points that John brought in from his experience as a pastor was the way faith communities act as what we called schools for friendship. That in the faith community, you have opportunities to interact with people of different ages. So you'll see kids, and you'll see young, teenagers and young adults and middle-aged people and old people. Hopefully you'll see all of that. And there are not very many organizations in our contemporary culture that have that kind of age mix, right? And so people get age segregated, and our neighborhoods get age segregated, right? There are neighborhoods where people will say very happily, oh, it's just all young families on my street. Well, it would be nice to have a couple old people on your street too, right? To kind of look after those kids when they're riding their bikes in the street or something. And so we wanted to talk about communities also. So as I said before, in 2011, that book was pretty theoretical, academic, but in the last decade, things have changed, and things have changed very much in Wisconsin. I mean, you're a living example of that. The fact that we have got dementia care specialists all over our state is fabulous. And we are so fortunate, because there are, I would say the majority of states don't have anywhere near what we have in Wisconsin. And likewise for programs like memory cafés. We have the most memory cafés in our state of any state in the union. And yet when people think about aging and our country, they think, oh, well, old people live in Florida and Arizona, right? And so it must be Florida and Arizona that have lots of programs for people living with a type of dementia, and it's not true. So there have been a lot of positive changes in the last decade. We need more, but there have been a lot.
And what I see are they're leaving the Florida and the Arizona and the South to come back up here to live by family.
Right.
And they move by family into these young neighborhoods with these young families, or they've lived there and their neighborhood is turned around and they don't know their neighbors. So I think we could do better with not only being a friend, but being a neighbor.
Exactly.
And having those neighborhood kind of gatherings again to get to know your neighbors. So,
right.
Yeah. I think they gave an explanation of a memory cafe in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Want to, so just going off my notes, as far as the social model of dementia, you kind of had talked about how, the friends concept. I put down a quote: "The condition is not just an issue of health to be defined in a narrow medical sense. Rather, the person with dementia is understood to live in a community in a relationship with others." Right. And that's the human rights in dementia, and just the basic humanity of us living within a community, within a state and a country like ours.
But one of the things that is really unfortunate about this condition is that we have so focused on the brain, right? And so I actually, make a practice of not showing pictures of the brain, but I've been in a whole lot of lectures where pictures of the brain are shown, and there's deterioration in this part and that part and changes. Well, yeah, we all have brains, right? And thank goodness, right? But the focus has been so strongly on the biomedical, and so it makes me crazy. You probably saw this in the book where I talk about the language that we use. And you will see in newspapers, you'll hear it on television, you'll hear it in, just everyday talk. People talk about dementia patients. And why is it that we have to put that medical label on people living with this very complex condition, this complex condition that involves the whole person, and the whole person living in relationship with other people. And yet our culture just wants to talk about the brain and changes in the brain, which of course is, that just is so limiting. If you have any other disease, we don't do that, but we do that to people who live with the type of dementia.
Right. And the fact of, celebrating what they do have yet.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
How we can bring that out in them is, very simplistic thinking or thought process, but if you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
And so to bring just music to the table, just how they did that 60 Minutes on Tony Bennett the other night, it was magnificent. But what I think surprised me, and it just kind of brought it full circle with this book, is how Allison Cooper was asking questions as if he had no idea what dementia was. And it's like, do we need to start at the top?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it's just getting that basic knowledge out. And, I'm very glad that they were able to shine that light on his performances. And if you haven't seen it, go watch that.
Yeah, that was another thing that my students and I learned in this big survey that we did in the Fox Valley. We asked people what they thought was needed to help make our communities more dementia friendly. And we were really doing this research before this term dementia friendly got to be so widely used. So, we were asking people, and the number one thing that people said was education, that they needed to know what we're talking about here, what this is. And unfortunately, a lot of education has just been focused on the brain and not on bringing forward these ideas of the whole person.
Right. Well, and even just in the chapter here about arts and artists and dementia friendly and inclusive communities, is just, you really go into that and how to celebrate that creativity and what that looks like. And how to, you said how to turn a traditional nursing home into a lively, engaging place where residents and staff delight in a performance for community members. Can you kind of speak on that and time slips? And
oh, sure, I'd be glad to. So Ann Basting is the author of a new book called Creative Care, in which she describes how we can transform our views of elders and especially our care for people in what we refer to as care communities. Please don't call them institutions. And please don't refer to the industry of nursing homes. Okay, these are care communities. And how we can transform them through various arts engagement opportunities. And so in her book, Creative Care, she describes this marvelous project that she did in Kentucky. And John and I had the opportunity to drive. We did a road trip to Kentucky to see this. And it was a project that was taking place over the course of 2 years in Medicare nursing homes. And these are not fancy places. These were places, in fact, John and I had not seen this for a long time, where there were 3 people in a room divided by curtains. I mean, we're fortunate in the Fox Valley that we don't have places like that, but this was Kentucky, very poor area. And what they did was get this collaboration of these Medicaid nursing homes to create a play. And it was a play that was based on the Peter Pan story, but it involved all the residents of the nursing home plus community members. And then the audience experienced the play by walking through the nursing home. And it's hard to describe briefly, but Anne does it in the book. But what that did was to break down that barrier between this nursing home, which, you know, I mean, most people say, well, I don't want to go in that nursing home, right? I visited my grandmother 40 years ago and I didn't like the way it smelled, right? I've heard that so many times. But then what do we have? We've got a lot of people who are lonely, helpless, and bored living in these places. So the arts as a way to bridge that gap between the long-term care community and the wider community, it can do marvelous things. And, you know, we started doing that years ago. I got a small grant. You might remember this. I got a small grant from the Community Foundation for an artist in residence out at Brewster Village. And we got this group of Brewster Village residents together once a week. And the artist was Audra Haas, who owns the Fire in downtown Appleton. And she came in once a week, plus some volunteers. And we had this group of people with dementia. And we did different art projects every week. We painted and we gave them all, remember those disposable cameras? So we gave them disposable cameras and they walked around and took pictures and we did some glass things, fused glass. Anyway, we did all this art. And then we had an art gallery. We created an art gallery at Brewster Village where we invited the families and friends to come in and see. And we displayed these artworks with people's names and they gave titles to their paintings, etc. And then we also took all this art downtown to what is now the Trout Museum of Art, but it was the Appleton Art Center back then. And we displayed all this art and we invited the community in. So that's just one example of trying to break down the barriers and to show the wider community that these individuals have something to contribute, that they can bring joy to our lives through their creativity. And, you know, Fox Valley Memory Project before the pandemic, and you were involved in a number of those. We did that with care communities around the valley where people made art and then we came together and had a big celebration. That's the kind of thing that will change attitudes. You know, not that many people are going to read my book, but they might come to an art show where we're offering free refreshments and music and dance and whatever. And that might change some attitudes.
Right. Your quote in the book is not treating residential care communities as if they're on a moat.
Right.
And that was, you know, a good visual is that inventing new ways to live with each other. And, you know, I say people living at home in their neighborhoods changing over. These residential care communities are usually in neighborhoods.
Yes.
And they're right in people's backyards and there's life in there and wanting, you know, to bring life out. And so if we just, help change that mindset, we'll help those individuals or just keep that dignity going.
Just have to get through this pandemic.
This is pandemic to the side.
Right.
We're ignoring that's happening. So at the end of this book, you had put sustaining dignity, hope, and meaning in time of dementia. And just, you know, how would you, I guess, foresee, you know, the future of dementia? Like, what's this next book going to be about? You know, is it how Wisconsin is shaping the country to have dementia capable communities? You know, what are your thoughts on looking ahead? And
Well,
Is
geez,
there-
Gary, do you want to be a co-author?
You know, I was just gonna say that before this book was written, I remember some comments from John about Susan just was gonna retire, but she wants to write another book, and we had a good chuckle. And here's a book, so sure, I'm in on it.
Okay.
We'll let John off the hook this time.
Well, I'll tell you, it's really important that we learn a difficult lesson here, and that is that we need to acknowledge that there is plenty of suffering that is associated with these types of dementia. And you notice that I'm really trying to be inclusive here about not just Alzheimer's disease, but
Right.
many different types of dementia. There is plenty of suffering, and it's experienced by the person with the diagnosis and by the family and by the friends.
Mhm.
And so we don't want to have rose-colored glasses on and say, that we ignore that. We don't. We acknowledge that. But at the same time, we need to embrace the idea that there can still be joy and laughter. There can still be meaning. Say your loved one no longer can speak, but can hold your hand, right? Can smile when you enter the room. That is the kind of thing that we need to begin to reinterpret as a way of saying, yes, this person still can give me a sense of joy and meaning.
Mhm.
No, this person is no longer going to go to a Packer game with me, or my grandpa is no longer able to go hunting with me, but I can talk to my grandpa and we can make up stories together, like the time slips things.
Mhm.
I can ask my grandpa a funny question, and it doesn't matter whether he starts at point A and goes to point D and then point F and Z and all around. We can still have a conversation if he's still able to speak. That we learn how to get into dementia world, as I say, and enjoy that. I've said so many times that being with my friends who live with a type of dementia is it's a time when I can't think about anything else, right?
Mhm.
And I've referred to it in another paper as relational mindfulness. Everybody's talking about mindfulness these days, and you go off by yourself in a corner of your house and you meditate. Well, fine, that's wonderful, and I'm glad people do that. But when I relate with people having some type of dementia, that's a kind of relational mindfulness, because I can't, other thoughts, I can't be making up grocery lists, right?
Mhm.
And I find then after those visits, or after a memory cafe or one of our chorus practices, I'm feeling good.
Mhm. There's an emotion that comes over you that
Yeah,
was just, wow, I was just in that moment for a whole hour.
right, exactly. And yes, I recognize the losses. Absolutely. I'm not trying to whitewash that. But I'm saying that there is a new way that we can learn to relate to these people.
Right. So I marked the last little paragraph you have in this book, and I want to read it. So,
Okay.
someday, even without cures for all the types of dementia, the practices and policies of dementia friendliness and dementia inclusivity may be intimately woven into the whole life of our communities. The ideal would be to embrace ways of living together in community that are friendly toward and inclusive of all persons. Making communities good for people living with dementia can make them good for everyone. And just doing dementia-friendly business training, it's just good customer service.
Right.
It's just being a kind human to others, and lending a hand when it needs to be lent, and
Absolutely.
being that good neighbor and friend.
Right. And, a model of that really was put into law with ADA, right?
Mhm.
So, and you and I both can remember when that happened, and people were saying, oh, it's going to be too expensive. And
Yeah.
who needs these ramps for wheelchairs?
Right.
Because we never see anybody with a wheelchair, but well, we don't, because they can't get places.
Right.
And then we found out that all of these accommodations that we made helped everybody.
Right.
So that's
Moms with
what
strollers.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think is it's the potential for the dementia-friendly community, is that
Mhm.
when we become really aware of these interactions, and when we work hard to set aside this stigma and to be inclusive, it's going to
Mhm.
help everybody.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Susan. I would recommend this because you do go into a chapter of dementia and explaining, the definition and different bunking different myths in there. So that is a great thing to have in the beginning if people are not familiar with dementia and what that is. So you can even read this book and learn a few things or two on the facts of dementia. So I really, really thank you for this. Thank you for putting the time and effort into this book. It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we have some time for questions. If we have,
Somebody was going to pull questions together.
yeah. Oh, they wanted us to talk about what a memory cafe is, their purpose and their impact.
Sure. Yeah, that's a question that we get a lot. And basically, it is a time when people come together in a place, and it does not have to be an actual cafe. We have wonderful memory cafes with Fox Valley Memory Project that are in libraries, that out at Mosquito Hill Nature Center, and we have one at an actual cafe, at Rivertime Cafe. But it's a time when people come together, care partners and the person who has dementia, or the friend and the person who has a dementia, for 90 minutes of social interaction, some kind of engaging program, an opportunity to leave the stigma behind, not to have to worry. Say you're there with, you're a woman, you're there with your husband, and he says something that you might not think other people would like. Well, people don't care, right? Everybody's accepting of that, because we all know what this is about, and we know it's challenging, but we like to say you leave your diagnosis at the door. Right. And we've had so many people who have come to observe memory cafes, and they'll say, I remember this a few years ago, somebody from a radio station that came to observe a memory cafe, and she pulled me aside and said, well, I can't really tell who has dementia and who doesn't. Well, yeah, that's the whole point.
Exactly.
We're just here together enjoying ourselves, and all the programs are engaging. It's not like you're going to go and sit passively and
Watch a movie.
I
mean, sometimes there's a movie, but it's not every cafe.
But you're going to be engaged with it somehow. And we, during the pandemic, of course, we could not meet. One of the things that we cherished pre-pandemic was our treats. Right? It's a cafe. So we'll have coffee and we'll have cookies and fruit and, whatever. And so that has been a loss with the pandemic, but we're hoping that we can get that back. And some of the cafes are doing that in a very creative way. But it is an opportunity to be social. and to address that loneliness issue. That fact that a lot of people find that when they have this diagnosis, whatever type of dementia it is, their friends drift away. And it happens because people don't understand, and it's the stigma and, all that. So the Memory Cafe is a way to say, we have a social group that's important to us, where people care about us. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a question, is there anything on the horizon regarding state or federal law supporting dementia-friendly communities?
I don't think in general, I don't know of anything like that, because, all the states are doing different things. And to be honest, a lot of states are doing practically nothing. But there is an organization called Dementia-Friendly America that is trying to help communities that really want to address this question of how they can become more dementia friendly. So you can go to their website and you can see they've got a toolkit, and they'll work through issues for people in communities. I usually advise people that the memory cafes are the best place to start. They're not expensive, and it's just a marvelous way to address the loneliness, helplessness, and boredom right off the bat.
Yep. As far as law, there is not much law, but there was, the state budget did pass to be able to fund more dementia care specialist role throughout more counties. So that is a good step toward having more presence within the counties and communities to create those programs too.
Absolutely. So, and, I can talk about dementia care specialists because I'm just so proud of this program that we have in the state of Wisconsin. And one of the things that I think is so impressive about it is the way you all connect with each other, right? You really are a community yourself. And so you've got people up in Bayfield, and you've got people, in Rock County, and people in Milwaukee, and you all have your own particularities, right? Rural and urban, et cetera. But you do exchange ideas. And I think that's just wonderful. And
if there's a bank that contacts us to do dementia friendly, we try to get to the whole branch of the banks, and so therefore if it comes into another community, that DCS takes it and trains that bank, so that it has been a big network of us. So next question, what is next for Susan? Will she continue to research and write on this important topic?
Well, it's hard for me to think about giving it up.
Right.
So yes, I'm working on a paper now that is not specifically about dementia-friendly communities, but I made this resolution way back in the 1990s that I would never write another paper or book chapter or book that left people living with dementia out. I always want to include them. And so this paper that I'm working on is actually for a religion journal. And what I'm trying to pull together are thoughts about how people have coped with the pandemic, and how their sense of spirituality may have helped them or may have harmed them, and what happened when their faith communities had to shut down. And elders without technology, they couldn't watch Facebook Live, right? And so that's the issue that I want to engage with, because I think that faith communities are a place that can be dementia friendly with some education, although a lot of them really are not very focused on their elders, but that's something that we can change.
Right. There's a question. I imagine combating boredom for those experiencing dementia was particularly hard during COVID. Can you talk about ways we as caregivers or family members can work to create a more engaging environment?
Yeah, it certainly has. It's been hard for everybody. Although I've been reading some interesting research lately about older adults in general. And a lot of them had said before the pandemic they were lonely, and they had kind of learned how to live with it, right? This was somewhat surprising to some of these researchers. But I think that in terms of caregivers, care partners, and family members creating a more engaging environment, just to think about everyday creativity. I mean, to look out your window with your friend, your grandma, your spouse, whoever, and to say, it's a beautiful day. What do you suppose the birds are doing today, right? And it doesn't have to be some scientific answer. It can be like, let's make up a story about what the cardinals are doing, or the leaves are turning color. What's your favorite color? How do the leaves sound when they're falling from the trees, or when the wind is blowing through the trees? Let's make that sound together, or let's move like the trees are moving. Those kinds of ways of engaging that don't require a lot of language, especially for people who are struggling with language.
So sensories, think of the senses. So
Right.
any touch that you can do of
Yep.
bringing in leaves, for example, the fall theme of just feeling or smelling
them. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. In my line of work of just the caregivers or care partners throughout COVID is, ensuring that they're taking care of themselves as well. Because that will directly affect the individual with dementia as well. So
that's right.
And as you said, leaving memory cafes or whatnot, when you make something engaging, it's a little more rewarding.
Oh, yeah. And another thing about the care partner, yes, we know we have a ton of literature about care partner stress, right? And we know that this is bad for people in terms of their mental and their physical health, to have this constant feeling of stress. So that's where friends can step in. And what I said in the book, I gave that example of those friends coming to a memory cafe. People will often say, well, let me know if there's anything I can do for you, right? Okay, well, that puts the burden on me, right, to think of something. And of course, I don't want to have to be a burden, so I'm not going to tell you. But if the friend would say, hey, I've heard they've got this great memory cafe at the Nina Public Library, and I'd be happy to take your mom, or I'd be happy to go there with your husband or your wife or your partner or whoever. Wow, that's really helpful to the care partner. So it's little things like that we can do for one another.
Yep, absolutely. Have you said anything about the Purple Angel program?
Well, we've mentioned it a little bit when you talked about the banks. The Purple Angel program is a program, again, that started in England. And it is a program to educate community organizations and businesses about how best to relate to people living with a type of dementia. And so pre-pandemic, and we're beginning to do it now again in some locations, to go into a bank, as you said. And I remember doing this at a bank before the pandemic, and it was the early morning meeting, and I gave them some basic information about dementia and some suggestions about communication and having patience with people, and just some basics of relating to folks. And then the meeting was over and they all had to get ready to start their day. And several people came up to me and wanted to tell me about their own personal experiences. And I'm sure you've had that experience too.
Yeah.
So we have trained people at drugstores, at veterinary clinics, at dental offices, at banks, as I said, the YMCA. So if you look around the Fox Valley, you'll notice decals that have a purple angel and it says, "We are dementia aware." And that means that this organization has reached out, and Fox Valley Memory Project and the dementia care specialists have come in and done this purple angel training.
Mhm. Is your book available at the local libraries?
I hope so.
Yes, I can I can unmute myself. Yep, it is available at both all the local libraries. And if you don't see it, go ahead and just ask and they can help put it on hold for you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Any more questions for Susan? This has been great.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Yeah, it's been energizing, and to reference this book or to just have it in a resource library to refer to and have. I appreciate your work with this and your work throughout the years. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, well, it's been a joy for me. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you both so much. And thank you to everyone for attending. I don't know if Melanie, if you had anything to close with.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for that incredible information. I had some experiences with this and needed to learn so much more as I was going through it. So you provided a ton of light on some of the things that I have experienced personally, and I really am thankful for you sharing your information with us. And I know it has to feel empowering for so many people to have those that knowledge and those connections. So there is the link in the chat to some of the local memory cafe events. So please check those out. They are incredible. And thank you everyone for being here today for the Fox Cities Book Festival. This is our first full day of events with authors, and we have events all the way through Sunday. So check out more of our incredible lineup, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mhm.